Walter Jennings, a dignified 90-year-old Marine Corps veteran, began his day like clockwork, riding his cherished 1945 Harley-Davidson to Franklin Fuel Stop, a place of quiet ritual and familiar faces. But his peaceful routine was violently shattered by Razer and his swaggering crew of young bikers. They mocked his vintage jacket and cruelly knocked his irreplaceable service pin, worn faithfully since 1945, to the concrete. Humiliated, Walter silently picked up his fallen badge and retreated inside. Yet, unseen by the arrogant youths performing for their live stream, a quiet resolve began to stir among the bystanders, and a cryptic call was made by a silent observer. What unforeseen forces were about to converge, and what justice awaited those who dared to disrespect a true American hero? If Walter's powerful story of dignity and brotherhood resonated with you, please show your support. Like this video, subscribe to my channel for more inspiring tales, and share it with someone who needs a reminder of what true respect looks like. Your engagement helps us share these powerful stories and honor those who earned it long before we arrived. Look at this fossil, trying to act like he's still tough. One of the young men smirked as he ripped the old service pin from the man's jacket, flicking it carelessly to the ground. Walter Jennings, 90 years old, a Marine Corps veteran whose every step carried more honor than any of those boys would accumulate in their lifetimes, stood his ground. He didn't say a word, didn't flinch. He just stood there, steady and silent, the flush of humiliation burning beneath his weathered skin. Then slowly, deliberately, he bent down to retrieve the small piece of metal that had lived on his chest nearly every day since 1945. His knees protested, his back ached, but he didn't wince. That pin was part of him. And in that brief moment, the entire world seemed to pause. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Time itself seemed to draw in a breath and hold it. But minutes later, as if summoned by the very weight of that silence, the sound of engines rose on the horizon. From every direction they came, 50 motorcycles, rumbling low and steady, forming a perfect circle around the station. The formation wasn't chaotic. It was precise, intentional, protective. Not a single rider spoke. They didn't need to. When you touch one of theirs, they don't show up with words or fists. They come with presence, silent steel, and something even more frightening to the kind of cowards who mock the brave. Respect earned through sacrifice. Every day, without fail, Walter Jennings woke up at exactly 5:30 a.m., though he rarely needed the alarm. After a lifetime of discipline, his body simply knew. He'd rise before the buzzer, shoulders slow to uncoil, but every movement deliberate. Even at 90, Walter carried himself with a sort of quiet precision, a muscle memory of his years as a Marine. Though the world had changed, though the battles now lay decades behind him, something in him never left the field. He lived alone in a plain white farmhouse tucked at the edge of Mason Creek, Ohio. It wasn't much, just one story, with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked when the wind blew right. But to him, it was sacred ground. He and Helen had bought the place together in 1951, not long after they said their vows. She'd been gone 15 years now, but the house still breathed her in its corners, in the way her favorite tea tins were arranged on the shelf, in the lilies that always sat fresh in a mason jar near her photo by the front window. His mornings followed a ritual that never wavered. Feet touched the cold wooden floor. Slippers shuffled toward the kitchen. The coffee pot was ready, always prepped the night before, just waiting for the switch. With one flick, the scent of strong black coffee filled the room. No sugar, no cream, just the way he'd drunk it during the war. As it dripped into the old tin mug, dented and dulled by time, Walter pulled on his well-worn brown trousers, a soft flannel shirt, and the leather jacket he'd worn since 1945. Its emblem had faded, but you could still make out the shape, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. In the garage, under a hand-stitched canvas cover, waited his other love, his 1945 Harley-Davidson WLA. Army green, chrome-accented, and polished like new. He had worked on her for years, piece by piece, until she ran as smooth as the day she rolled off the line. Every bolt, every wire, every cable had passed through his hands. She wasn't just a machine. She was memory, a piece of history, a companion. Once the coffee was poured and his boots laced, he'd pull open the garage door. The early morning light would pour in, pale and silver. Sometimes there was mist rising from the fields, sometimes the bite of frost on the air. This morning it smelled of damp earth and the promise of autumn. He'd uncover the Harley like he was unveiling something sacred, run a hand across the cool metal of the tank, and whisper the same phrase he always did. Soft, steady. Let's ride, girl. The bike roared to life after 2 kicks. Not loud, not angry, just deep and even, a sound with weight, the kind that settled in your chest and said, I'm still here. Helmet strapped on, thermos tucked beneath the rear strap of the saddlebag, Walter eased out of the driveway and turned down County Road 12, heading toward town. The sun hadn't quite cracked the horizon and the road lay empty, except for a delivery van in the distance and a few early farm trucks hauling produce or feed. 10 minutes later, he rolled into his regular spot at the Franklin fuel stop, pump number 3. It was always open, always waiting. Like the universe knew this was his space. He wasn't just there for gas. Every morning without fail, Walter brought a thermos of hot coffee for the 2 morning clerks, Megan and Louise. They weren't family, but they greeted him like he was. He'd walk in with a smile, nod politely, and hand over the thermos with a quiet, warm, "Morning, kids." Then maybe a story, one from the war or from the early days with Helen, or just a thought from a dream he'd had. And they'd listen, really listen, with wide eyes, clutching the steaming cups like they were holding something sacred. To them, Walter Jennings was a living legend. To him, it was just another morning, another ride, another chance to keep moving forward in a world that seemed to forget too easily. Walter made a quiet promise to himself to stay present, grounded, and grateful for every mile that remained in front of him. The gas pump clicked as it shut off, signaling the tank was full. With hands that moved steadily from years of routine, he returned the nozzle to its holder. The morning air was cool and crisp, the kind that carried a hint of fall, and a soft breeze stirred the American flag hanging beside the entrance of the small convenience store. A few early commuters drove past, heads down and minds elsewhere. But for Walter, it was another calm beginning. Coffee was delivered, the old Harley was running smooth beneath him, and there were no complaints. No reason to expect anything but peace. Then came the sound. Not the low, familiar thunder of his own Harley, but something sharper, more aggressive, a high-pitched whine that cut through the air like a blade. 4 sport bikes tore down the street and whipped into the lot as if they owned every inch of pavement. Their engines screamed, then abruptly on as the riders killed them with theatrical flair. Neon green, matte black, fire red, each machine screamed for attention, built for speed and spectacle. The young men yanked off their helmets, each one sporting a cocky smirk and the reckless air of youth that hadn't yet learned consequence. Leading the pack was Chase Donnelly, or as he preferred to be known online and in real life, Razer. Everybody in town knew him. The name was self-given, but it stuck, mostly because it suited him too well. A sharp jawline, sharper attitude, and tattoos that tried too hard to be meaningful. He walked like someone who believed the world existed to be filmed behind him. At 25, Razer was all image, all noise, with no compass and no depth. Just a fast bike and an even faster growing list of followers. As they swaggered toward Walter, their phones were already up, one of them live streaming to an unseen, impatient audience. Razer's gaze locked on Walter's vintage Harley with the same look a predator might give an aging member of the herd. He circled the bike slowly, his voice carrying a smirk. Well, what do we have here?" he said, pretending to admire the machine. "You steal this out of a museum, old man?" Walter didn't even blink. He kept wiping a faint smear of oil from the tank with the faded cloth always tucked into his belt. "Nope," he replied evenly, "just keeping her alive." "Oh, he talks," one of the other riders said with a laugh, already recording. Another leaned in too close behind Walter, squinting at the back of his jacket. "Yo, check this out, World War freaking II. What were you, storming castles or something?" Razer snickered, stepping in closer, enough to invade space without crossing a legal line. "Seriously though, Grandpa, it's not Halloween yet. You look like one of those wax dummies from the War Museum." Walter turned and met Razor's eyes, not with anger, not with fear, but with something far quieter and more powerful. His voice came low and steady. If you've got something to say, son, say it with respect. Oh, that only made them laugh harder. Razor threw his head back mockingly. Respect, he repeated in a sing-song voice. Tell you what, I'll respect the dead. You there yet, or should I give it a few minutes? And then it happened. Razor reached out, casually flicking the lapel of Walter's old military jacket with exaggerated interest. But as his fingers toyed with the fabric, they caught the small, circular wood service pin, something Walter had worn faithfully every day since 1945. It came loose. It hit the ground with a soft, metallic clink. For one long moment, time seemed to stop. Walter stared down at the pin lying on the pavement like it was a fallen comrade. Slowly, almost ceremonially, he lowered himself to one knee, joints stiff but his dignity intact. He picked up the pin gently, brushing the dirt from its surface. Not once did he speak. Not once did he look at them. He simply slipped it into the pocket over his heart and stood again, silent and unshaken. Oops, Razor said, grinning wide. Didn't mean to break your little soldier badge. Walter said nothing. He turned and walked toward the store entrance, the bell over the door jingling as it opened. Behind him, the boys erupted with laughter, loud and proud, their phones still capturing every second. Inside, Megan, the clerk working the morning shift, had seen the whole thing through the front window. Her hand hovered nervously over the phone. She didn't know if she should call someone. She wasn't sure if calling might only make it worse. As Walter approached the counter, she caught his eye. You okay, Mr. Jennings? She asked softly. Walter gave her a smile. It was tight, controlled, the kind of smile that people wear to cover wounds that pride won't allow them to show. Don't worry, sweetheart, he said. Boys like that don't live long enough to understand the value of quiet. He paid in cash as he always did, ignoring the card reader. Outside, the show continued. The boys posed, laughed, shouted for attention. Razor straddled his bike and turned toward the open store door. Hey, Walter, he called out, loud enough for the internet to hear. Want us to call the nursing home for you, or you good? Walter didn't say a word. He just kept walking, passing the boys without acknowledging them. Not a glance, not a word, not even a flicker of emotion. There was no protest, no anger, just quiet. Yet somehow in that stillness, something shifted. The air grew heavier, more meaningful, as though the ground itself had decided, quietly without warning, to lean a little closer toward justice. Inside the glass-paneled gas station, Sandra Lopez stood behind the counter, gripping its edge so tightly her fingers had gone pale. She was 22, pulling the early morning shifts to help her mom make rent. Her worst day at work so far had been a broken coffee pot and a grumpy long-haul trucker who didn't tip. But this was nothing like that. This was something else entirely. From her place behind the register, she'd seen it all. Every moment, the way they shoved him, the laughter, the sharp ping as something hit the pavement. Walter Jennings wasn't just some old guy passing through. He was part of her morning. He'd bring her actual coffee, not the watered-down stuff they sold. He'd tell her stories so vivid, so full of life and history, she often thought they deserved their own book. He listened when she talked, made her feel like her words mattered. And now he stood outside, alone, like a relic from a past the world had tried to forget, mocked, surrounded, and exposed. Near the coolers at the back, an older man shifted his stance. Jeans, tan cowboy hat, quiet eyes. Earl Timmons, a retired plumber, and another regular. The kind of man who'd come in for a black coffee and nod instead of saying good morning. He had watched it all too. His jaw was locked tight, a faint twitch in his temple. His hand rested on the door handle, but he didn't move. Not yet. The silence inside the store had taken on weight, thick, suffocating, tinged with a shame no one wanted to name. No one knew what to say. No one except the tall man near the back, who hadn't so much as flinched the entire time. He wore a faded olive green jacket, collar high, no markings or insignia, military cut. He'd been watching, quiet, still, like stone. And now he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture. He turned away from the others, murmured something low into the phone. The call lasted less than half a minute. Then he put it away and turned back, his eyes locked on Walter. Outside, the group wasn't finished. One of Razer's crew, a skinny kid with gum perpetually stuck in the corner of his mouth, had wandered over to Walter's bike. He grinned as he flipped open one of the saddlebags like he had every right. "Yo, Razer, Grandpa's got treasure," he hollered. He pulled out a cracked, worn leather wallet. Tucked inside was a small metal tin. When he opened it, a photo slipped out and drifted to the ground. Black and white. 5 young men standing proud in front of a warplane. Their expressions were firm, their backs straight, their eyes bright with the kind of confidence born in battle. Walter's unit, brothers in arms frozen in time. "Look at this ancient crap," the boy laughed, holding the photo up for his live stream. "Bet none of 'em made it past Eisenhower." More laughter followed. It wasn't just cruel, it was clueless, sharp-edged with ignorance. Sandra didn't yet understand what was happening. Neither did Razer or his crew. But beyond the smirks and the arrogance, behind the quiet in the store and the old man's silence, something had already begun. Something deep and deliberate had stirred, and it was on its way. At first, it sounded like a far-off storm, faint and rhythmic, nearly drowned out by the soft hum of gas pumps and Razer revving his obnoxious neon green bike for the camera. Then it grew. Louder, thicker. The roar deepened, spread, and began to tremble through the concrete beneath their feet, like the coming of something massive. Heads turned. Sandra, frozen behind the counter, looked up. Earl, by the coffee machine, turned toward the windows. Even Razer paused, his phone lowering just slightly as his brow furrowed. From the far end of Maple Street, the first Harley appeared. Matte black, low to the ground, chrome catching flashes of the dull Ohio sky. Another followed. Then 3 more, riding side by side, moving like they were trained for it. And then they kept coming. 5 turned into 10, 10 into 20. They rolled in from all directions. East, west, north. Some rode in pairs. Others came alone. But each bike moved with purpose. No revving for effect, no tricks, no bravado. Just unity, precision, discipline. Like people who didn't need noise to make their presence known, because what they'd seen in life had already spoken louder than any engine ever could. They formed a circle, tight, unbreakable, around the gas station, cutting off every possible route in or out. By the time the last one pulled into place, there were 50 riders, 50 veterans, 50 machines that now formed a wall of chrome and leather. Silence and in resolve, silence thickened the air like mist before a storm. Every rider stood still, each one wearing some version of the same emblem it is stitched proudly on their backs. A time-worn American flag beneath the steel head of an eagle, the words "Iron Honor Riders" arched above. They were more than a motorcycle club. They were bonded not by mere miles on the road or the clamor of biker bars, but by something deeper. These were veterans, men and women forged in the fires of combat, hardened by duty, loss, and unbreakable loyalty. Their clothing bore the stories of their lives. Faded denim jackets, military camo, and weathered leather vests adorned with campaign ribbons and unit insignias. Some among them were young, with the tight expressions of those still carrying the weight of recent deployments. Others had silver in their beards, their bodies stiff from time and old wounds, but they stood as straight and steady as sentinels. And every pair of eyes shared the same look, steady, determined, unwavering, ready. No one uttered a word. Even Razer, who had strutted with such arrogance only minutes earlier, now stood frozen. The cocky grin vanished from his face. The live stream had long since cut out, and all that remained was confusion on his features as his bravado deflated like a punctured tire. At the center of the formation, one rider swung his leg over his bike and dismounted. Tall, with broad shoulders, his long silver hair was tied back into a low ponytail. His dark vest bore the Iron Honor patch, surrounded by smaller ones. Fallujah, Kandahar, Kosovo, each name a place of fire and blood. His boots hit the pavement with quiet command as he walked with deliberate strides toward Walter Jennings. Walter stood beside his Harley, back straight despite the ache gnawing at his knees. His expression was unreadable, but something in the set of his jaw said he was ready. The silver-haired man stopped just 3 feet away. "Walter Jennings," he said, voice low but firm, cutting through the stillness like a leader addressing his troops. "United States Marine Corps, Pacific Theater, Purple Heart, Iwo Jima survivor." Walter didn't reply immediately. He looked straight into the man's eyes, eyes that had seen war and death and loyalty bought with blood. Finally, the man continued, "I'm Caleb Strong, president of the Iron Honor Riders. Some of us served with men of your generation. Others were trained by your sons. But every one of us owes you a debt we don't take lightly." Walter gave a quiet, solemn nod. "I saw the live stream," Caleb said. Louder now, making sure his voice carried, especially to Razer. "We all did, and we came to make one thing clear." He turned his head slowly, sweeping a hand toward the circle of bikes and riders that now surrounded them like an unbreakable wall. "You don't stand alone." In perfect, silent accord, the Iron Honor Riders lifted their heads. No applause, no cheers, just a field of solemn nods. A few saluted. Most simply stared ahead, still and steady, standing watch like guards at a sacred post. Not one of them had to speak for their message to echo loud and clear. Walter's eyes misted over for the first time in years, and he didn't blink them away. Didn't hide. On that gray Ohio morning at an ordinary gas station, he was no longer just a 90-year-old man waiting to be forgotten. He was the reason 50 warriors had come. He was the reason that silence now rang louder than any insult. And for the first time since the war, Walter Jennings no longer felt invisible. The screech of tires on pavement came before anyone actually saw them. Razer and his friends roared around the corner on their sport bikes, laughter echoing in their wake, still drunk on the approval of their online audience. But as they pulled into the parking lot of the Franklin fuel stop, the sound died in their throats. They didn't even make it halfway in. The entire scene had changed. 50 motorcycles now formed a perfect ring around the gas station. Harleys and cruisers lined up like sentries. Some bore the patina of age, their frames etched with memories of foreign battlegrounds. Others gleamed like weapons freshly forged, disciplined, and ready. Every rider stood beside their machine, arms folded or hanging loose, eyes locked forward in unflinching silence. A wall of leather and chrome, of steel and stillness. Razer's confidence melted. He eased his bike to an uncertain stop. His friends instinctively followed suit, falling into line behind him. The swagger was gone. Their smirks, their cocky posturing, their loud bravado, all of it vanished beneath the weight of that stare. These were not just bikers. These were warriors. Their eyes had looked down the barrels of rifles, had stared death in the face and refused to blink. The silence that engulfed the parking lot wasn't empty. It was heavy with meaning. Judgment, brotherhood, strength. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sounds were the soft ticking of cooling engines and the wind whispering across the gas station's awning. From inside the station, Sandra watched with bated breath. Earl Timmons now stood just behind the door, cap respectfully held in his hands. Alex Morales leaned against the counter, arms folded across his chest, eyes locked on the scene outside. Not a soul dared interrupt the moment. Sharp and steady, his eyes did not flinch. From the far side of the circle, a single rider stepped forward. He moved with a limp, perhaps a remnant of battle, but it did nothing to diminish the strength in his stance. He looked to be in his late 60s, his weathered face marked by time and service. His black leather vest bore the insignias of 2 wars, Vietnam and Desert Storm, stitched with the kind of care earned, not bought. In one gloved hand, he carried a small wooden box, the polished lid catching the morning light like a quiet flame. The man approached Walter without hesitation, his boots heavy against the concrete. When he reached him, he stopped and opened the box. Nestled inside on a bed of black velvet was the WQUI service pin, the same one Razer had knocked to the ground just hours before. Now it gleamed, meticulously cleaned, as though it had never touched the dirt. The veteran turned then, facing Razer with a gaze that was unflinching and utterly silent. "You dropped this?" he said. Razer didn't move. His eyes flicked to the box, then to Walter, and finally to the rows of riders behind him. All still, all watching, their presence like a wall he couldn't break through. But he didn't reach for the pin, didn't speak, Shame had fastened itself around him like a chain. Without a word, he turned his bike, the others following suit without question. No rebuttals, no parting shots. Just the quiet weight of disgrace. They rolled away slowly, their engines low, the sound of them fading into a stillness they had no power over. The morning air held its breath. Above, the sun finally pierced through the dense gray of the Ohio clouds, casting a muted golden light across the gas station lot. Walter remained exactly where he stood, surrounded by a phalanx of 50 riders, veterans who didn't need to speak because their presence said everything that mattered. Loyalty had a soundless language, and here, it echoed loudest in the hush. And then, through that stillness, someone stepped forward. From the edge of the gathered crowd came a familiar figure, the young man in the olive jacket. Alex Morales walked with care, both hands holding something reverently. A small wooden box, smooth and dark, handled like it carried a sacred weight. He approached Walter and stopped in front of him. No fanfare, no words. He simply opened the box. Inside, resting on soft black velvet, lay Walter's original Marine Corps service pin. It had been cleaned and polished to a quiet shine, the metal gleaming, but the years still visible in its edges. The pin had endured war, time and absence, and yet here it was, returned to him with the dignity it deserved, a silent recognition of where it belonged. Walter stared down at it, unreadable. The pin caught the morning light just enough to bring out its gold. He didn't speak, not at first. He seemed to study it like a man reconciling with his own past. Then Alex spoke, voice low but unwavering. "Sir, your son asked me to give this to you," he said. "Captain Luke Jennings, he's with my unit, currently deployed. He told me what this pin meant to you and what you've meant to him." Walter's gaze lifted. For the second time that morning, his eyes brimmed, but not from sorrow, not from humiliation. This was something deeper, something forged in pride, something earned. Alex went on, his voice steady despite the moment's weight. "He said to tell you this exactly. Tell my old man the Corps still makes him just as stubborn and just as loyal. And tell him I learned that from him." And then silence, as if the entire world waited. Walter didn't blink, didn't waver, didn't smile. He simply reached out and took the box with hands that were as steady as they were scarred. He closed the lid with care. His voice, when it came, was firm and low. "Tell him," Walter said slowly, each word deliberate. "His old man is proud." 5 simple words, but they struck harder than any metal could. They moved through the air like a military salute, unspoken yet fully understood by every veteran standing witness. Each one knew, some more than others, what it meant to send a son off to wear the uniform, and what it meant when that son stood tall, because of the father who had shown him how. Walter turned to his Harley. With deliberate care, he opened a saddlebag and placed the box inside, as though handling a folded flag. He closed it gently, adjusted his jacket, and lifted his head. Around him were brothers and sisters in arms, soldiers, riders, guardians of the code. He didn't need to thank them. His story, his silence, the weight of his years, it all spoke louder than words ever could. In the hush that followed, Alex took a step back, returning quietly to his spot near the pump. He watched as Walter stood beside his bike, tall and unshaken, a living piece of history, wrapped in loyalty, duty, and something unspoken. No one cheered. No one clapped. There were no speeches, no final declarations. Just a man and his story, and now a town that would carry it. 2 mornings later, before dawn broke fully over the horizon, something new appeared beside the old weathered bench outside Franklin Fuel Stop. A small wooden sign, hand-carved and modest, had been placed there, was Grace. That same weathered bench, the one where Walter Jennings had silently wiped the dust off his photo just days ago, now bore a new mark. Not a shiny plaque, no gleaming brass, not even a name to call attention to anyone in particular. Just 7 plain words etched into the wood with care and intention, a message left for those who give without ever expecting a thank you in return. No one had seen who'd placed it there. Some figured it was one of the Iron Honor Riders, someone wanting to honor a fellow soldier without ceremony. Others thought maybe it was the owner of the station who, ever since that morning, had barely said a word, just quietly gone about his business, changed somehow. It was Sandra who spotted it first, early one morning just before 6, while unlocking the front doors to start her shift. She didn't touch it, just stood there a moment, reading the words, then smiled gently and walked inside. From that day on, no one dared disturb the bench, not out of fear or obligation, but because something deeper had taken hold. Reverence. Everyone in town knew what had happened by then. Even folks who never gave much thought to veterans, who never cared for motorcycles or history, had seen the pictures online, heard the retelling on the radio, and watched the security footage that had gone national. And Walter, he never changed. Same routine, every morning, like clockwork. He'd ride in at the same time wearing the same jacket, his pace calm and unhurried, that dented old coffee thermos tucked neatly into his saddlebag. He still gave Sandra and Luis that soft smile when he arrived, handed off his coffee with no fuss. Then, after filling up at pump 3, he'd walk over to the bench, sit down, and watch the sky brighten over the horizon. Sometimes he sat alone. Other mornings, one of the other veterans from that day would show up, their Harley rolling up quietly beside his. They never spoke much, sometimes not at all. They just sat together shoulder to shoulder in the silence of mutual understanding, beside the man who, without raising his voice, had shown the world what quiet dignity really looked like. As for Razer's crew, they were never seen there again. Word around town was that Razer had moved his meetups to the far edge of the city, some half-abandoned industrial stretch where no one cared who he was or what he rode. Others said he'd sold the bike altogether. No one could say for sure, but what people could agree on was that something had shifted at the Franklin fuel stop. The station, once just another roadside pit stop, had become something else entirely. Pump number 3 was never blocked, never dusty. Even on the busiest Saturdays, when lines of trucks and cars snaked past every available pump, that one spot always remained clear, pristine as though some invisible hand made sure it stayed that way. Waiting, just in case. Walter began arriving a few minutes later each morning. Folks around town started calling Pump 3 the captain's pump. Quietly, no announcement, no banner, just a shared understanding. Once a week, someone would leave a small token by the bench, a carefully folded flag, a single dog tag, a white flower. There were never any notes, never names, but everyone understood exactly what they meant. Walter himself rarely spoke about what had happened that morning. If anyone asked, he'd just give a half smile, shake his head a little, and say, "Just a little misunderstanding. Nothing more." Got sorted out. But Sandra knew, so did Earl, and Alex, and every veteran who'd shown up that morning, standing shoulder to shoulder without needing a word. They all knew the truth. What happened at Franklin Fuel Stop wasn't just the silencing of a bully. It was a reminder to the town and maybe to the whole country that not all traditions are outdated. Some are sacred. That day hadn't simply been a clash between generations, between youthful arrogance and aging valor. It had peeled back the protective layers society tends to wrap around itself, the comfort, the assumptions, and forced everyone to look, really look, at the people we pass by, at the lives we so often overlook. Walter Jennings wasn't just an old man riding a motorcycle past his prime. He wasn't just a veteran in a faded jacket. He was a living chapter of American history. A man who had stood for something bigger than himself, who had lost more than most, and survived. Yet all those 4 young men had seen that morning was someone slow, someone weak, someone they could dismiss with a laugh and a shove, someone they believed didn't matter. This story is not fiction, not really. Its echoes live in the real world we scroll past every day. Videos of veterans being mocked, disregarded, misunderstood. A Medal of Honor hero asked to give up his airline seat. A veteran with a prosthetic leg denied entry to a restaurant because of his service dog. A soldier in uniform accused of pretending. In every one of these stories, the deepest wound wasn't from the words or the actions themselves, it was from the blindness. The refusal to look past the uniform, past the wrinkles and the silence and see the human being still standing there. Walter stood for every veteran who had given more than they ever asked for and never once demanded recognition. And in the end, what transformed the moment, what turned that confrontation from a tragedy into something far more powerful, wasn't retaliation or revenge. It was grace. It wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about something deeper. something sacred. Brotherhood. 50 veterans showed up, not to yell, not to condemn, not to draw attention to themselves. They came in quiet solidarity, standing shoulder to shoulder, their presence speaking what words didn't need to say. You are not alone, Bidal. We remember who you are. That's what real respect looks like. Not showy, not loud, but steady and undeniable. It's the kind of respect and that lives in silence, in stillness, in the choice to pause and truly listen when someone struggles to find the words. It's the decision to notice the quiet man in the corner, the small pin on his jacket, the weight of the history tucked behind his eyes. It's the instinct to ask, not with words, but with attention. What have you lived through that I should honor? Strength doesn't always come dressed in fatigues anymore. But that doesn't mean it's gone. The uniform may come off, but the strength, real strength, never leaves. It lives in posture, in presence, in principle. And kindness? Kindness isn't weakness. Not the kind of kindness that matters. In today's world, real kindness, the kind that protects, the kind that sees, that is rebellion. That's where the true power lies. It's restraint instead of rage. It's courage that doesn't require cruelty. It's standing up even when you stand alone because you know what's right. Walter reminded us of that. His story is more than just a moment. It's a lesson. We all have something to learn from him, to look a little deeper, speak with a little more care, carry ourselves with a little more dignity, and to remember always that the ones who deserve our respect aren't the loudest voices in the room. They're the ones who earned it, quietly, long before we even arrived. And now, what about you? Have you seen someone looked down on, pushed aside because they were older, quieter, different? Have you ever carried the weight of a moment where you stayed silent when you wish you hadn't? If this story stirred something in you, type respect, or better yet, share your own story. Maybe about a veteran, a parent, a neighbor, someone who showed you, not with speeches, but with actions, what true honor really looks like. Thanks for spending a little time with this story. If it left a mark on you, pass it on. Let someone else be reminded. Kindness isn't soft. It's not naive. It's strength, remembered, lived, and passed forward. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and keep looking twice because the heroes among us don't always wear uniforms anymore. But they're still here, and they still walk beside us.